So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the pathophysiology of malaria. Now, understanding the pathophysiology of malaria has to do with understanding majorly the life cycle of the malaria parasites, which is Plasmodium species. Now, let's start with the life cycle. It all starts when an Anopheles takes a blood meal from an individual. So let's assume this is an Anopheles and it bites this individual. Before taking the blood meal, the mosquito inoculates or introduces the infective stage of the parasite, which is called the sporozoite. The sporozoite is inoculated into the individual. Now, mind you, the sporozoites are found inside the salivary gland of the mosquito. So when the sporozoite gets into the individual, the first place it goes to in the body is the liver. And between 5 to 7 hours on getting to the liver, it begins to infect the liver cells. So you have the sporozoite infecting the liver cells, which are also called the hepatocytes. Now, after this particular stage, the parasite undergoes a certain type of multiplication, right? Now, that multiplication is what we call the sporogony. Now, the multiplication gives rise to another type of stage of the Plasmodium parasite, which is called the schizons. So the schizons are formed in the hepatocytes. The schizons, after some time, develop to form another type of parasite, another stage of the parasite, which is only revealed when the hepatocyte ruptures. So when the hepatocyte ruptures, it releases another type or stage of the parasite, which we call the merozoite. The merozoite. But something can happen in Plasmodium species like the ovale or vivax. This does not really happen like this. The hepatocyte does not really rupture. What happens is that when the parasite infects the hepatocyte, it becomes dormant. It becomes dormant. That means it does not rupture, it does not develop further. Now, this is a very important physiological event in the life cycle of the malaria parasite because this is responsible for what we call relapse in malaria. Okay, so you treat and it goes, but it doesn't go entirely. And after some days, it resurfaces. It is caused by the ovale species of malaria parasite or the vivax species of malaria parasite. And the thing is that from this particular stage, it can still go back and forth. That means it can develop into the schizons and rupture. You get so this stage is very important in the pathophysiology of malaria. And the next stage is the merozoite leaving the liver into the peripheral blood. Now, when it gets to the bloodstream, it begins to infect the red blood cells. So this parasite begins to infect the red blood cells. Now, when it infects the red blood cell, after some days, the red blood cell begin to form another type of stage. Sorry, the parasite now begins to form another type of stage, which is ring-like. So you see it has a ring-like nature. And that stage is what we call the trophozoite. The trophozoite stage. And the trophozoite stage can rupture the blood vessel, releasing the parasite, which is also the merozoite still. Now, something can happen here. When the parasites are released, it develops to form the microgametes. Now, the merozoite now develops to form what we call the micro and the macrogametes. So it is like the female and the male sex cells. So you have the female sex cell being formed and the male sex cells being formed in the peripheral blood. Now, when another mosquito comes to take a blood meal from this infected individual, let's assume that this particular mosquito is not infected, and it comes to take the blood meal from this individual, it sucks up the gametocyte, that is the microgamete and the micro and the macrogamete. So the macrogamete should be the female sex cell and the microgamete should be the male sex cell. When it sucks up these two in the gut of the mosquitoes, in the gut of the mosquito, these two come together. So they fuse to form a zygote. So this is 1N, this is 2N. So they fuse to form the zygote, which is 2N. Sorry, this is 1N, 1N. So when they come together, they form 2N. Now, this zygote is a spindle-shaped parasite, a spindle-shaped stage of the parasite, and it is called the okinate. This parasite finds its way somehow back into the salivary gland of the mosquito and develops into another stage, which is the infective stage called the trophozoite. So this is what happens in the life cycle of malaria. Now, moving to the physiological events that happen in the body when you are infected with malaria. This is an organ we call the spleen. And we all know that the spleen is responsible for destruction of the red blood cells, right? Now, when the red blood cells that are infected go to the spleen, it is not destroyed the same way as the normal red blood cell. So what happens is that the splenic macrophages, so these are macrophages of the spleen. They are part of the immune system of the body. It begins to eat up or engulf. It engulfs the infected cells. When it engulfs the infected cells, it breaks it down and destroys it. So this event continues to happen over and over and over again. And because of the high level of engulfment, the amount of red blood cells are reduced. And that is what leads to anemia. From here, it is not just the engulfment that occur. During the engulfment, the body releases some chemokines as a result of immunological activities, releases some chemokines. Now, these chemokines can be interleukin 1B and tumor necrotic factor alpha. Now, these chemokines are what is responsible. These chemokines are responsible for the symptoms of malaria we feel, like the chills, the fever, the headache, and even sometimes um, low blood pressure. Yes, and other symptoms we feel. That's what happens in the spleen. Now let's move forward to what happens in the blood vessels. When the infected red blood cell migrates to the blood vessels in the brain and let's say the lungs, what happens? When it gets to the capillaries of the brain, the moment the infected red blood cells get into the blood vessels, what we call adherence molecules are produced, and they are produced on the endothelium of the red blood cells. And they are produced because there is a foreign body. So let's assume that this is, we already know that these particular red blood cells are infected. Now, because of the plasmodium parasite inside the red blood cells, these adherence molecules are produced. And most times they are the VCAM1, VCAM1, and other type of adherence molecule. Now, when these molecules are produced in the brain, The red blood cells begin to adhere to this molecule. Now, when this adherence happen, it begins to form a clot that can block the capillaries of the brain. So you can have the blockage of the brain capillaries. And this leads to what we call the cerebral malaria. So that's what happens in the brain when the parasite lingers and gets to the capillaries of the brain. Down in the lungs, when the parasite gets to the lungs, almost the same thing happens. It begins to cause breathing distress, breathing problems, and every other problems associated with the lungs as a result of the presence of the parasite in the lungs. So this is just a run through of the pathophysiology of malaria.